The death penalty is officially off of the table for Luigi Mangione. In a stunning blow to prosecutors, a judge tossed out 2 of the 4 counts against Mangione in his federal case, a murder count, which was punishable by death, and another firearms offense. The 27-year-old is accused of fatally shooting UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson in the middle of Manhattan on the morning of December 4th, 2024. A nationwide manhunt immediately ensued, and Mangione was found days later in a Pennsylvania McDonald's. Mangione still faces 2 stalking counts in the federal case, both carrying a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Criminal defense attorney Phil Harvey joins Forbes True Crime to discuss. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Phil Harvey, a criminal defense attorney. Phil, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
There is a major development in the federal case against Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione is the man who's accused of gunning down UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson in the middle of Manhattan at the end of 2024. Now, there's news that he will officially not be facing the death penalty. To start off the conversation, what's your reaction here?
That's right. No death penalty on the table. It is a huge win for the defense. And I must say, I think kind of the larger point out of this is I think we're seeing that the Department of Justice got out a little bit too far over their skis, because what we saw from the U.S. District Judge today was just a very technical legal decision. The murder charge that the federal prosecution was trying to use to bring the death penalty in this case is what's called predicated on a lower offense. And it's pretty clear if you read just the basic statutes that give the definitions to these terms, that it just didn't apply in the case. And so the U.S. District Judge made a ruling today that said the federal government cannot proceed on the murder charge because it was predicated on stalking, and stalking does not qualify as a violent offense. So it's a purely jurisdictional issue. It's not the judge's opinion about what should happen in the case. Brittany, frankly, it shows that the prosecution were not able to get charges in the indictment that could stand up to a basic legal review.
So because this is very technical, does this set any type of precedent? Because essentially, you really broke down that legalese really well. The murder charge had to go with a crime of violence. Stalking, the judge is saying, is not a crime of violence. Does that set a precedent that stalking will never be a crime of violence because this is such a high-profile case?
The U.S. District Judge's decision today is not something that establishes formal legal precedents, but what we do see is that it is an interpretation of the law that's come before. And if you read the statute, and actually, it's anybody who wants to look it up, it's 18 U.S.C. Section 16, and it's very clear, Brittany. It says that the predicate offense, which in this case is stalking, has to involve the use, attempted use, or threatened use of physical force. And of course, stalking doesn't require that. Now, there is another option under the statute that says if stalking by its nature involves a substantial risk that physical force could be used, that could also provide a predicate. But of course, stalking by its nature means that you're sort of lurking in the shadows, nowhere near the person you're stalking. And so neither of those really fit at all. And I think, again, we just see that this was an indictment that was probably never going to stand up under any sort of federal scrutiny to the federal statutes in the case.
I wanted to get your take on how big of a blow you think this is for prosecutors, because Attorney General Pam Bondi, she directed prosecutors to seek the death penalty here against Mangione. She characterized Thompson's killing as a, quote, premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. And this is yet another win for Mangione's legal team. In September, they got his terrorism charges tossed, and that was in the New York State case, and that meant the first-degree murder charge was out. So is this just a case of really good attorneys, a really strong, stellar legal team, or is this a case where the prosecutors were just simply shooting for too many stars?
I think it's shooting for too many stars. I think that's really well put, because look, if they had just made measured decisions based on the law and the facts at the beginning, we would be here talking about how Luigi Mangione is still facing possibly life in prison. But because they overreached on the indictment and the state prosecutor, as well as you observed back in September, got their first degree murder charge knocked down as well because it was predicated on this being an act of terrorism. So in both the state court and the federal court, it really I think what we're seeing shake out is both the federal and state prosecutors overreached and were essentially promising the public that we were going to get a death penalty case or a life without parole case. If they had just slowed down, maybe an extra day or two, done the legal research, then we wouldn't be talking about prosecutorial failures. We would just be talking about a very serious murder case marching to trial.
How much does perception here matter? Especially you're a defense attorney, you see this, you see prosecutors overreach here, and a judge saying, hey, essentially, you overreached, I'm tossing X, Y, and Z charges. How good is this for the defense?
It's great for the defense, unquestionably, because in a case with this much media attention, I don't think anyone is going to even pretend to think they're going to get a jury who hasn't heard about the case. So I think both the prosecution and defense are expecting to get potential jurors who have heard about the case. And these jurors, the kind of the predominant news items in this case has been how popular Mangione is, getting over 6,000 letters in jail and over $1 million in donated to defense, and essentially the ineptitude of the prosecution. So when you have potential jurors coming in with that as sort of the backdrop, it's, as they say, you can't unring the bell. And I think the danger for the prosecution, the challenge for the prosecution is going to be to pick a jury that doesn't allow these high-profile pretrial hearing losses prejudice them in their evaluation of the state's and the government's case once the cases get to trial.
2 of the 4 federal counts have been tossed. There's still 2 counts related to stalking. But if a jury has this perception that prosecutors are inept, how strong do you think the stalking case is for prosecutors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, these are the questions I ponder a lot with my colleagues, with my clients, and just in general, you want to step into the courtroom, you want to present a case to the jury where you're not over-promising and under-delivering. And I think, again, as we said, you can't unring the bell. It would be hard to imagine a prospective juror who has not heard of the case and has not heard of some of these news items, and for them to, at the same time, not have followed it so closely that they have a bias. It just means they're going to walk in with an impression of the case. And so they walk in with an impression of the case being, this is the killer who murdered a CEO of a major insurance company, and they're expecting a serious murder case, and then the indictment's read and it's just stalking charges. I think there could be a real challenge there for the prosecution to overcome that whiplash and just the general pervasive feeling that this has been a case where, again, there have been a lot of missteps by the prosecution along the way.
I'm not an attorney, I'm not a prosecutor, but I can imagine it is worst case scenario for any attorney to show up to court and for this perception to be that they don't have this really firm grasp of the law. They don't have this firm understanding here, and they seem somewhat inept. And good news for prosecutors, silver lining for them, got really buried in this news today that the death penalty was tossed out, because in a separate ruling, the judge said that Luigi Mangione's backpack, which police found during his capture in Pennsylvania, can be used as evidence in this trial. And authorities say that there is a plethora of evidence in this backpack. They say it had the ghost gun, fake IDs, and a notebook that voiced Mangione's frustrations with the country's healthcare industry. That's everything that authorities are claiming is in that backpack. His legal team wanted that out because they said law enforcement illegally searched that. So how good of news is this for prosecutors?
And that's the irony there, Brittany, is that the federal judge has decided that that evidence can come into the federal trial. But we're still waiting for the New York judge to make the decision about how the state law applies to that issue. And so in the very case where the prosecution is going to want to get that backpack and its contents into evidence in front of the jury, they're just presenting a stalking charge. And so certainly all of that contributes to proving the stalking, because the journal proves that he knew who Brian Thompson was. He was he had a borderline obsession with the health insurance industry. All of these things contribute to the picture of him being a stalker. So absolutely, from just a nuts and bolts perspective, it helps the federal prosecutor make their case that he's guilty of stalking. But the big test is going to come from the ruling we expect from the New York State judge in May, based on the hearing back in December in state court. And that's where they're going to be deciding the same issue that Judge Garnett decided in federal court. The backpack can come in. We're still waiting to see what happens in state court with the backpack.
I mean, just as a normal average person, I hear murder charge out. Only thing left is stalking. I mean, I would much rather be accused of a stalking crime, right, than murder. How serious are these stalking counts?
They're still very serious. The federal guidelines are complex, and I have not done the analysis on his sentencing guidelines, but theoretically he could get up to life in prison even for the stalking. Certainly the evidence of the murder and the killing can come into the sentencing phase as well. So that suggests that he will get a stiff penalty if convicted of the stalking. So it's still a very serious case, and that's why I pointed out, if the prosecution hadn't overreached in their charging, we would just be talking about Luigi Mangione going to face a possible life sentence. But instead, as you pointed out, essentially the prosecution has allowed the big news to kind of get buried.
And it seemed like, based on how prosecutors were talking, and I'm sure, I mean, obviously you want to spin your case a certain way, it seemed almost like the Luigi Mangione case was a slam dunk, and now it seems like you said, it seemed like they overreached, and now it's kind of falling apart a little bit. But what specifically are you watching out for next?
What I'm watching for next is whether the state prosecutors get that July trial date they're looking for. Because right now, Mangione's defense team, they have been fighting a war on two fronts. And we know that we have a trial date coming up in federal court this year. And I know as a defense lawyer, you would like to be able to focus on preparing for one trial and not two. And so what we're expecting next in May is for a decision from the state judge on whether the backpack can come in. And I would imagine during that hearing, we're going to hear something about whether or not they get a 2026 trial date in New York court.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for here with all of the developments. I hope you can come back on soon and break them down with me, as well as comment on other cases. Phil Harvey, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany.